Hi, everybody. We're so glad you're here on a Friday afternoon for this workshop. I know there has been a great interest in AI this year, and especially we got a lot of feedback from Faculty Development Day. You wanted more on AI, so we are very happy to have with us today Lance Eaton. Some of you may remember him if you were here in the pandemic and took the HiFlex training. Lance Eaton is Director of Faculty Development and Innovation at College Unbound, in Rhode Island, a part-time instructor at North Shore Community College, and a PhD student at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, with a dissertation that focuses on how scholars engage in piracy. When AI, ChatGPT had started to come into play, Lance was someone who really stepped into the forefront in terms of training and documentation and things to support universities and faculty along the way. We have a great session today, and I will hand it over to Lance to get started. We will have opportunities for breaks and opportunities for questions, but please use the chat and raise your hand if anything comes up along the way. So I'll hand it off to Lance now. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Give me 1 second to get all my ducks in a row. Make sure I can see the chat, so as folks might drop things in there, I can interact with it as makes sense. And yeah, so let's get started. Thank you for that introduction, Caitlin. I'm Lance Eaton. I've been playing around with education, technology, and learning for I don't know, probably since I was a teenager on the internet back in the 90s, and playing and trying to figure out how this space makes sense to me and the things I want to explore. So today we are gonna talk about generative AI. I put that resource in the chat. I'm gonna put it in again. That's gonna bring you to this document. And I would just strongly encourage to save this. This will continue to be available. It has a lot of useful resources and things that we'll be working on in the second half of today. But let me actually just get into today's talk. So let's go into full screen. And of course, just like any class, I decided we should start today with a pop quiz. So I am going to open up the now, of course, I can't find it on my, there we go. I'm going to open up a poll. So this is a series of true and false questions about generative AI. So you can take a look at them on the screen, but they should also have popped up on your screen, and you can, I'll give you a moment or two to start answering them. You didn't know you'd be showing up on Friday for a quiz, did you? All right, answers are coming in. On my end, it's fun to watch the answers because it's like, a little bit of a race, or you kind of see the polls go back and forth. It feels like election night, but with a lot less at stake. All right, we're getting up. We've gotten up to the high 20s of folks that have finished. I'll give it another 30 seconds or so. I think we're gonna call the polls at that. Gonna end and share results just so folks can take a short little peek at them. We're gonna come back to these. So I'm just giving you a quick opportunity to take a look at kind of where the crowd landed with this. And we will, of course, come back to this and talk more about this during the conversation that follows. So thank you for participating in that. I want to move into my favorite way to really start off these sessions is I want folks to share what is generative AI, but wrong answers only. All right, so you can throw these into the chat if you feel inclined. You can come off mic, but what is generative AI? Wrong answers only. R2D2. Man, if only, right? There is a smart droid. Generative AI is a kind of intelligence. Our future overlords. Thank you, Gina. It is the doom for humanity. Robots controlling our minds, the best way to pass a class. Yes, Sharon, exactly. Thinking about generative AI is a kind of intelligence, but not a kind intelligence. Or maybe it's superficially kind, right? Any other takers? Our new bestie. Next evolution, eventually. A tool that can be used productively or problematically. There's no in between. Only if they don't abide by Asimov's three rules of robotics. Excellent. All right. These are great. These are great. Human intelligence. I did the thing that when we do any kind of talk around generative AI, of course, I went and I asked ChatGPT what generative AI is, but what like wrong answers only. And so it gave me this answer of generative AI is a magical creature that lives inside your computer and makes all of your dreams come true. It spends its days knitting digital sweaters and baking cookies for other programs. In its spare time, it enjoys composing symphonies for squirrels and painting abstract portraits of invisible friends. In paint, in primary, and painting abstract portraits of invisible friends. The primary function of generative AI is to serve as a professional online fortune teller, predicting whether you'll have spaghetti or tacos for dinner based on the alignment of your browser history. Now, that last line I do feel like is a little bit on the nose, but otherwise, this is about as good as we're thinking about around, silliness about AI. And I think that's something I like to start with. I like us to kind of just feel all right about because again, or as we step into this, I think something we have to acknowledge is that there's a lot there. There's a lot there to figure out. Um, and so again, as we're here, I'm gonna actually have us do one more poll. I'm gonna have us engage and kind of think about or get a sense of what our usage is in the room. So you're about to get a poll right now, and it is about AI usage. And so I'm just gonna talk through the questions as folks are answering them. But questions like, how ambiguous do you feel about using generative AI in general? Do you currently use any generative AI tools for personal use, for professional use? Have you used generative AI to help you with creating course content? And have you used generative AI with students? So again, feel free to complete those as makes sense. Results are really interesting, which I'll share in just a moment. All right, we'll give another 30 seconds. See some more activity on the polls. All right, let's share those results. And I'm just curious, we have a bunch of folks we have folks that are across the board. It's almost a 30-30 split, across not really, somewhat, and quite ambiguous, which is great. We see a little more mix around people that are using it for personal use versus not. We have a good amount of folks that are using it for professional use. And then we get a little more, again, a little more folks are using it for creating course content, and then fewer folks using it with students. I'd actually be really interested to hear, and again, you can come off mute or you can do this in the chat of uh, are if you're using it with students, what are some of the ways that you're using it with students? Anybody want to jump in and share an example or two? And again, you can come off mute or you can put it into the chat. To generate discussion questions. Yeah, that's really helpful. Create definitions of different behaviors and then had students critique them. I really like that. Anytime we get them to actually like push against, so engaging with generative AI, but engaging through that critical lens, using it with students for idea generation. Excellent. Show students how it can go off track. Absolutely. Part of figuring out its use is also figuring out where it can't be used or it can't be used well. How they can use generative AI to write programs, but warn them not to do it. I get that, right? If you can't understand what you're creating, that yeah, you're setting up certain challenges for being able to improve upon it, for sure. It's help coding in Excel. We all need that, right? Generating class outlines, for sure. Yeah. So, I think this is we are still in this exploration stage of what are we doing with it? How do we figure it out? A lot of things that just aren't that we're only going to figure out as we get used to it, as we go through this. So, um, I want to just kind of, as we step into this, I think part of the challenge about generative AI is both the ubiquity of it and the abundance of it. Um, and in fact, there's just so much of it out there. If you've been paying attention, there feels like there's a million tools, right? And so we have all these tools like ChatGPT and Claude and Copilot and Bard and Barnabas and Perplexity and Writesonic. Um, you know, right into the chat, which of these have you heard of? How many of these have you heard of? How many of these are you familiar with? Oh, go for it, Gina, or not.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were just asking if people were familiar, so I raised my hand.
Oh, perfect. That's
I'm familiar with Chat GPT, and I have
yeah.
a funny joke about it.
I mean, we all love I love in our household, we joke about it a lot. We call it Chad.
Chat GPT in French is Chat GPT, which means cat
Yes.
hearted.
Yes, right? That's one of the things that makes me feel very empowered in thinking about or not worrying about generative AI is that like somehow the people that created this still created something that ultimately is a fart joke. There's something grounding in that, silly as it can be, right? So, the comments are coming in. Many folks have heard of ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini and some of these. Um, one of the things I often do here is I'll stick one in that actually doesn't exist. And so Barnabas doesn't exist. But of course, it sounds like it could be an AI tool, right? Like nobody's going to blink on that. And part of the reason is, again, this ubiquity of these tools, of them showing up anywhere. Um, and these, what most of these others that I put up here are some of the most popular ones. But you're also right, Gina, that it's embedded in lots of other tools as well. So, I think there's a lot going on here. And I think it's very easy for us to, in some ways, dismiss generative AI as kind of this other big tech hype cycle that we've experienced before in the history of education, that we've experienced a lot in the last 20 years. I do think there can feel like Silicon Valley tech bros are just pushing a lot and a lot on us. But I do think generative AI is different. First, it's different from the AI that we've been using the last decade, right? We all have stories of like how Siri or Alexa has misheard us. And hopefully when I say that, I didn't set off anybody's Siri or Alexas. Um, And while these tools, these voice automated tools and things like that, they were impressive, they were still clunky. We still haven't really been great. There haven't been great use cases or active use cases that gain a lot of attention. But generative AI that can create text and audio and video through just everyday language, that feels different. It feels different because the ease of use is just on a level that like we haven't been used to with cutting edge technology, right? We're several years into the launch of the metaverse, but can anybody actually tell me what the metaverse is? Like actually tell me in 50 words or less, or like I'm a 5-year-old. Um, the lift to figure out something like the metaverse, and I'm sure some folks right now are being like, "What's the metaverse?" This is a billions of dollars investment um, that Facebook and other entities have been really trying to put forward, and it's still a colossal flop. Um, and generative AI is different, right? It's different from that. It's different from a lot of other technologies because it comes to us in the form of a chat box. And, the very chat box that we are using in this Zoom right now, the very chat box that has been around since the 90s in AOL chat rooms or an instant relay chat, like we all know if we see a text box on a computer to enter text. So part of what's disorienting in all of this is the OpenAI and many of these other companies, they took something that was terribly complex and nuanced, right? Mm, this large collection of uh, this large language model, this mixture of these different technologies, and they put it into something as simple as a text box. And that became a very, very devilishly easy invitation that became a very easy way to engage with a very complex technology. And so this is some of the things that we're reconciling with is like extremely complex technology and really actual simple ease of use. So one of the things that I like to emphasize as we talk about this here and as you go on after today and the like is this doesn't sit with any one of us. And there's many people probably right now who feel this deep desire, this deep concern that they have to figure it all out, that they have to hold all the weight of generative AI in themselves. And this is a hard one for academia. This is a hard one for our society as a whole, which is very individualistic. But I still think doubly so for academia that none of us can really figure out AI on our own. And actually, what we need to do is figure it out together. So, we can decide how we want to, how we're going to use it in our courses and implement that and go about our business. But this tool represents some significant change, and it's change on par with the pandemic itself and the rise of the digital classroom. And so we actually really need collective wisdom here. We need the wisdom that's going to bring different knowledge, different understanding, different use cases about these tools, the way we use them, the things that will work, won't work, and might work. And so AI is here and it's going to change, but no single person can figure all of this out. I know I can't, and I say this as somebody who I've been at this point, I've worked with thousands of faculty over the last 2 years around generative AI. I have been engaged in lots of conversations, and I don't hold it all. I can't. What I hold is a variety of communities of practice of people I know that know something about this more than I do, right? This is kind of collectively, we're all trying to figure out what the elephant is. So everything that proceeds from here, key piece of this is just really understanding that this is not an individual effort. This is a collective effort within higher ed that we all need to build upon, that we all need to work with. So part of what I'm doing here, what I'm walking people through in this conversation is one part is, what are these big considerations, these pro tips? I'm also going to show you what are some actual tangible ways that you can use this and what are the results from those. And hopefully through this conversation, be able to help you figure out what should be your next move, what are some ways to step in and use generative AI, and how might these actually start to show up in your classroom. So that's kind of the arc that's intermixed with a bunch of different considerations as we go through. So as I said, I'm going to talk about different ways of use, and I put these into categories. These categories are not a perfect taxonomy. This is more of a folksonomy. It's more of a way to help you think about how you might use it and how you might use it in different buckets. Because part of the challenge of generative AI is you sit there, you look at that text box, and you're like, well, what do I put into it? How do I interact with it? How do I think about what to get out of it? And so one way that I think about this is, just merely this idea of the ways it can be helpfully efficient in stuff that just they're they're things we need to do, but they're not really the things themselves are not necessarily important. And so they take away from the things that are important. So some examples of that is things like task minimizing. Um, Accessibility. Now, to be clear, accessibility is 1,000% important. But where I talk about, the thing's not important, the thing not important is like sometimes having to clean things up or to change language that you either know you're never going to get to, or that is not necessarily within your skill set. So this is what I mean. It's like, how do you get to those things that like feel really hard to prioritize, or the things in and of themselves just aren't that important? Other things like generating lists or prioritizing tasks when you're just trying to like get ahead of all the other things. So one of the low level examples that I use, and this is one that I feel like every faculty member can relate to, is this is a thing we do at the start of every semester, or like a few weeks before the start of the semester. We pull up our syllabus and we pull up a calendar and we are like, okay, I'm teaching on Tuesdays. So let me look at every Tuesday and write down the date of that Tuesday into my syllabus. And we all do it. We all spend collectively, probably across the country, hundreds of thousands of hours just getting dates into our syllabus. So what I now do is I go to ChatGPT and I put in this prompt, create a verified list of all the Tuesdays between like the start date of the semester and the end date of the semester. This is what I want the output to look like. I want it to look like the day, comma, the month, and the numerical day of that month. And then I can follow up with another prompt, which is also provide a verified list of any holidays that happen between those two dates and list them as such, right? Because again, these are the things that we often are doing. And also there's a really good question as to whether we need to spend as much time. This is why I talk about it as a task minimizer. So in under 30 seconds, I now have that list that I can easily populate into my course. It takes, what used to be a 5 to 10 minute task now takes 30 minutes. Sorry, 30 minutes. It takes 30 seconds. Right? So it's looking for those opportunities, right? Me looking at a calendar and transcribing that date back and forth, that doesn't help anybody, right? That is not an intellectually valuable thing to do. It is something that just needs to get done. And then again, it gives me the holidays as well. So this was one of the questions that I had asked, right? This idea of artificial intelligence maybe becoming sentient. And the answer is false, right? It's false because generative AI is not a thinking being. And I know this is hard because we've had so many sci-fi novels, movies, TV shows, uh, so many people in the media telling us, oh, like there's life inside there. And unfortunately, we have this long history of telling ourselves that our objects are real. And this goes back millennia. Like this isn't just a 20th century or 21st century thing. This is a thing that goes back to Greek stories, to many cultures' origin myths at some point have tales of inanimate objects having life. So yes, generative AI is this complex technology with lots of possibilities, but sentience isn't one of them. And we have to be careful about this anthropomorphizing that we often see happening with generative AI. In fact, in modern times, there's a term for this. It's called the Eliza effect. Is anybody familiar with the Eliza effect? And if so, you want to unmute or put it into the chat. So somebody's probably asking ChatGPT about it right now. Um, so the Eliza effect came as a result in like the 1960s, where uh, Eliza Doolittle, sort of actually, Roseanne, it sort of does in the way that it was named, is that it was this computer program to which it was structured to just basically respond linguistically of whenever text was put in, it would turn keywords from that text into question. So you might type in, I'm having a bad day, and it would respond, why are you having a bad day? Or what is bad about your day? Right? Like it would very simplistically take your language and turn it into questions. And people who are using this, some portion of them, right, is an early response program that function as a therapist. That's right, Agnes. Like people fully believed it was real. People fully believed there was a ghost in the machine, but it wasn't. But people that didn't stop people from believing it. And so I raise this because it's something we have to think about in our own usage, in our students' usage, and how we make sense of it. Okay, so moving on to one of those other true false, like Janet from The Good Place. I haven't finished watching. Yeah, yes, Janet from The Good Place. I haven't watched it yet, so no spoilers. It is on my list, and I'm hoping to start it in a few weeks. Um, So this is another question of generative artificial intelligence is similar to human thinking when it arrives at its answers. And this one is also false. And it's false for two reasons. The simpler, and I'll put that in air quotes, simpler of the two reasons is just that um, humans think differently. This is why we talk about neurodiversity, right? And the ways we make sense of the world is very different. So there's no uniformal way to say that it thinks like humans. Um, but also, what we do know about human thinking, by and large, is that our minds are composed of whole things, be it words or images or sounds or tastes, um, things that are whole. Where generative AI, uh, it processes through what I can only call, my technical language for this is it works by mathing the hell out of things, right? That's the mechanism by which generative AI works. And so what this means is that when generative AI is working with a text, it will rely on what's called its large language model. And all a large language model is like a massive data set of text and the statistical models that calculate the relationships within that data set. Now that massive data set is basically like what many of these entities have used is basically the entirety of the internet and vast stores of books. So that large language model was created by an AI tool that just mathematically analyzed relationships across it. Now, it didn't analyze across words, right? It didn't analyze across whole concepts. It analyzed it across what are called tokens. And tokens are only 4 or 5 characters long. So if you had the word language, it would turn that into a token. It would turn that into several different tokens, right? It isn't going to be just one singular word. And so therefore, as we break them down into those tokens, we lose the holistic meaning. So the AI actually calculates the probability of relationships across those tokens, across its data set, and also kind of measures it up against the prompt that it's given, right? So it's ultimately calculating. It's like, here is a set of tokens that's being put in. Let me compare this to this massive token set that I already have and figure out what the probability of response is. So, when it gets a prompt, it's mathematically examining that relationship across tokens. So in that way, it strings these tokens into words and sentences that make mathematical sense. And so therefore, it's not thinking, it's mathing. It doesn't have any internal awareness of understanding of the relationships of its words. It's very much like, and this may not be everybody in this group, but for some of us when we were younger and we're playing with calculators, we would find ways to make the calculator spell words. I'm seeing a few laughs, so clearly I'm in good company. We'd use the calculator to spell words. The calculator had no internal awareness or understanding of what those words were that we were spelling any more than AI does about what we're asking of it. And this is actually a really important piece within this. Generative AI doesn't create meaning. We as humans give what generative AI creates. We give it meaning. In other words, to generative AI, it is just a calculation. But it's when we read it and we actually inject intention, inject meaning, inject interpretation. And this is one of those really key things, important things to consider in how we talk about it, how we engage students with it, is like really drawing this out. And we'll talk more about how and what that looks like. So part of our challenge with engaging with generative AI is just finding our own use case for it. So I think one of the most important things we can do is find the ways that it works well for us, even if we're ambiguous about it, especially if we're ambiguous about it. Because the only way we're going to think about how we're using this, how we're making sense of this in a world in which it's everywhere, in a world in which students are stepping into jobs today that require familiarity with it in different disciplines and areas, is to start to understand how we might use it. And so one thing I can't stress enough is if you have not found your own ways, and this is personal or professional or what have you, just some ways to use it in a way that makes sense to you, I think it's going to be really hard to help others with it, even in a critical way, right? It's going to, if you can't understand why beyond the like it's easy or it's easier, but the value that it can offer you in what it does, I think it gets a lot harder to help others be critical of it or to help others use it well. So this is one of those like big things to just kind of be thinking about. And I think that leads us into the space of really thinking about brainstorming. One of the ways that it's used really well, one of the ways that folks find it really powerful to be to get outside of our heads. So many people have been using it. People mention this in the chat as like it's really great for idea generation and things like that. Figuring out activities for learning, planning, concept mapping, self-assessment, and also as a dialogue partner. This is one of the ways that I continue to find it useful is like something to challenge, to reflect back at me. What are the things that I'm trying to figure out and like. So this is one that, and I should be clear, any of the prompts that I'm sharing here are in that resource document that I've mentioned before is on all the slides here, and again, putting into the chat. So here is an example where I have gone to ChatGPT and I said, hey, you're an expert educational developer. I want, you understand some of the challenges that faculty are facing. I'm a faculty member, or we have a faculty member thinking about, changing pedagogical approaches and how they assess and engage with students. And so this faculty member is looking to revise part of their small business in law course using service learning. And they particularly want to update their exploration of trademarks and franchising. So be sure to include objectives, topics, objectives, activities, and assessments that align with service learning approach. Right. So this is one of those, like, if I'm trying to figure out, I want to do something differently within a course or within a class or things like that, I can go and I can say, hey, here are the parameters. Like, here's the type of course. Here's the kinds of goals that I'm interested in. Here's the type of the type of thing I want to do. Here's the limitations, right? This has to happen in a 40-minute, this activity has to be 20 minutes or less. It has to be easily unpackable or easily accessible, etc. So I can put those in to start generating ideas. And even if I don't like the first idea that it comes up with, I can just very simply say, give me another idea or give me another idea. So I put that into the chat, and again, I'm not going to read all of this. You have access to the slides, but it puts together an interesting possible assessment where students will prepare and present a comprehensive trademark audit and protection plan for a local business partner. What the plan will include, its connection to service learning. So it just helps it helps you to kind of see the dots connected, align it with what you're looking to do. And I've found myself leaning on this to pull out particular examples, or when I or another faculty member are looking to like make tweaks or try to figure out what's the thing that's missing or what's the thing they want to add. And one of the things with brainstorming that I would encourage folks to be aware of is with generative AI, it works really well when we flip the script. So everybody is concerned about going to generative AI to get answers. I go to generative AI to get questions. This is where I think it's one of the most powerful ways of engaging and playing with it is when you turn it into an interviewer, right? When you say, hey, I want you to ask me questions. Because lots of times, like, there's like probably it's not that I know, but I know if I think enough, I can get there. But sometimes it's the right questions that get me there. Um, so this is one of the things that for my own use, for students' use, I just find really powerful. And if you use, say, ChatGPT, the paid version on your phone, you can actually engage in a verbal dialogue that when it's done, you can actually go online and everything that you said is actually converted to text. So this is a way that I do a lot of planning around different talks that I have to do, different projects, writing, et cetera, that I'm working on. I'll use the AI to interview me, to help me get my thoughts out. That will then be that much quicker to doing the writing because now I've been like talking about it and it's been capturing that in text. So it's a really powerful way to be thinking about how we use it yourself as well as with students. So generative AI, artificial intelligence can lie. This was one that I think folks were a little mixed on. Does anybody want to, again, either in the chat or come off mute and explain their answer, either true or false?
I was a little stuck because I didn't know if we were considering hallucinating lying. I mean, it's lying in the fact that it's not accurate, but it's not lying. It's not like trying to deceive us. So I wasn't sure which way we were going with that.
Yeah, right. Is hallucinating lying? Does lie have to be deceit? I've got from Melissa, no, not lie, but it is taking information from a database. Does it actually use misinformation? We see examples where it generates citation for articles that don't exist, and that's from Roseanne. So this is the tricky thing. Artificial intelligence doesn't lie, right? Lie comes with intention, right? Lie is an actual intention. And what do we talk about? This is the Eliza effect in action. When we think about it as lying, when we even use the term hallucination, those are like that's the language of humans. So this is what I mean when it's tricky. By us even thinking about lying or even using the term hallucinations, right? We are giving agency over to these tools. We're giving an existence that doesn't exist. And with technology, that's always tricky. With technology, that's always kind of a problematic thing to start to give it that anthropomorphized language. So that said, does it calculate wrong answers? Absolutely. It absolutely calculates wrong answers. That's the thing we have to remember is it's not thinking, it's not lying, it's not hallucinating, it's calculating. And it's doing probability and probabilities can always be wrong. So I think that's something to really really keep in our heads about how we talk about it, how we engage our students with it. It's so easy to start to say like it's lying, to give it some sense of existence. So while it doesn't lie, we certainly shouldn't trust it, right? We certainly want to verify and double check those answers. So it's a really important piece that we sometimes miss within this. And I'm just seeing if there's anything in the chat to follow up on. So, Melissa, to your point, not lie, but is it if it is taking information from a database, does it actually use information? So this is the other part, is that, again, it's unless the AI is purposely set up to go and quote, it's not taking information. It's not taking information in the database in the same ways that we do, right? It's not going over to this site and highlighting this chunk of text and bringing it over. It may be using a website and looking at how the text is arranged there to to do those mathematical calculations of the tokens, but it's not, again, as we would do holistically, going and taking and being like, let me move this over here, unless it's a tool that's been set up specifically to quote. So these are tricky things to navigate and for us to think about. And then to your other point, asked it to give me stereotypes of groups, and it tells me it cannot, politically correct answer, rather than share what the research has shown. And that's another really great piece of this, is within all of this, there is the bias of the data set, the bias of the people who have created these tools. And when I say bias, they put in certain biases, and we have to remember that sometimes there's ways we use bias in discussion and in discourse that are very clear it's problematic. And, we hear about this particularly like in news and political bias and the like. But within all of our tools, there's also intentional bias put there so that it can be legible. And so this is one of those questions of whether it's one of those questions of what level of legibility do the user or do the creators of these AI tools want to put into these tools. And that is a moving calculation that we see play out in really interesting ways across lots of these different tools over the last few years. Awesome. And then to Gilbert's, what if the prompt is tell me a lie? I love that one. And that's an interesting question because again, I think it's still not telling you, or you're still making meaning out of what it's calculating, right? Back to that earlier point of it itself does not hold meaning. It's what we decide to interpret into it. And so to jump into Gina's question of does it take feedback from users or only utilize databases input by programmers? Do we have a hand in creating its intelligence? And the answer to that is yes, no, maybe. And that some of the tools absolutely will use our input, depending on what level of user you are, what level of privacy you have the ability to instill into it. And that's going to be continuing to be a moving target, both with individual tools and the tool set as a whole, until we have better legislation and better understanding of exactly of what it's doing. And I think that's going to take a while, unfortunately, very similar to other moving technologies. So generative AI is not going to take all of our jobs, but it is going to impact our jobs. It is going to impact lots of different industries, and some of those we can anticipate, and some of those we're going to be surprised by. It's going to help us do a lot of things we couldn't do before, and through that be able to create new opportunities. And yet there are going to be jobs that are lost, and that's concerning. That's a challenge. That's a thing we have to recognize. I think most importantly for us at educational institutions is that we offer degrees in programs that are going to change, are going to be impacted by this. And so it's really upon us to figure out, how is this going to impact my field, my discipline? What is this going to change, right? Without a doubt, the internet changed almost every profession out there. It changed how we got information. It's changed how we do research. I was a history major in 1990. I graduated in 2001. I started in 1997. The internet changed how research happened. You can be a historian in this day and age and not necessarily have to do the same things you did, 25 years ago. The ways you can access information, the ways you can work with information, the ways you can work with artifacts, it's just different. And so this is something we have to think about, is how will this hit differently? How will this impact different disciplines? And how do we prepare our students for that? And some of it is we have to continue to play with it. We have to continue to make sense of it in these spaces. So let's talk about another category. In this case, it's content generation. And of course, where we personally are very concerned about content generation around generative AI with our students, but there's also lots of places it just starts to help us, whether it's creating outlines, strategic projects. Many of us are involved in accreditation or having to produce annual reports or quarterly reports for our departments or for projects that we're on. And I think these are tools that start to really help us do that. If you haven't checked out Google Notebooks LM, during the break, I'll put a link to a video I made on it in the chat. That really feels like a significant game changer in doing these bigger projects around even accreditation or any types of certification and stuff like that internally. So really thinking about the ways it can help you get started, can start to build things out. My other favorite example with this is student examples. So as educators, we absolutely love going to a student and saying, your work was amazing. It was fantastic. Can I use it as an example for future students, right? We all cherish that. We've either been asked that when we were students, or we love building that connection. We love rewarding or feeling like we're rewarding a student by saying, your work is so good, I want to hold on to it for future students to learn from. But we're never, ever, 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 nor should we, go to a student and say, your work was so horrible. Can I use it as a future example for other students? We're never gonna do that, nor should we. But having good and bad examples are actually really useful, are actually really helpful. And I think about this particularly in discussions where I can use generative AI to come up with bad examples of discussion posts that are actually grounded in the specific discussion that that's happening that week. So students can look at, here's the gamut, here's the high watermark, but also here's the low watermark, and to be aware of, if yours looks more like the low watermark, you're going to want to improve upon it. Here's one of those examples of, one of the cool things that I've used it for in creating rubrics. And in this case, it's, I'm having students do collaborative peer reviews and review one another's work. I wanted to create a rubric that has accessible language, that guides the peer review process, has 3 levels of evaluation, and make sure that the language is asset-based language. And then ultimately the output is in the form of a table. So again, in 30 seconds or less, I have this very clear table. Now, if you're like me, rubrics are helpful and often they're limiting. So they're also often a pain because we can do the categories and we can do the levels of evaluation, but filling in all those squares is a headache. So this is off to a great start. I can decide I want more levels of evaluation. I might want to condense or change up what the criteria are. I've got a bit of choice. I've got a bit of ways of working within this, in that I can just say, hey, improve this or change that. Provide more details about meets expectations. So doing something that kind of has this, especially if I'm going to be building a couple different ones of these for different assignments or activities, it just becomes really helpful to have this tool help me move through that process a little bit more quickly and then be able to really fine tune it rather than like the initial grunt work of like just getting the details. So a lot of this leads into this idea of what I call the 2-bucket challenge of generative AI. So there's one definitive fact that we know about generative AI for the foreseeable future, and that is it calculates the probability of responses and it does not know the answers, right? So it calculates, but it does not know. And so therefore, in order to use generative AI well, really, really well, the kind of well that, we feel we can trust, we actually need 2 buckets. The first bucket is a working understanding of how generative AI works, its limitations, its capabilities, its biases, and how it fits into the larger landscape of, well, late-stage capitalism. That's really essential to knowing what it is and isn't, what it can do, what it can't do, but more importantly, sifting through all those promises of tech bros in Silicon Valley. But the other bucket is a deep knowledge of the subject matter that you're working with AI on. It just doesn't know things. It only calculates responses, and that can only get one so far. So when it comes to disciplinary knowledge, it still falls drastically short. It can produce facts, but it can't produce knowledge. And so this is where I think higher ed and our work is before us, is the value proposition of higher ed is helping students understand that these 2 buckets are essential. If they want to use AI, they actually really still need to know what the domain is. Otherwise, they can't spot the problem. And it's one thing if AI was only good 50% of the time, nobody would care. But AI can be good upwards of, 80 to 90% of the time. And that's where it trips us up. That's where it gets really easy to miss the mistakes, to miss the thing that it did that was wrong. And this is something Mahabali talks about a lot of, like, because it's wrong, because it's so rarely wrong, we stop seeing the issues, especially if we don't really know the content. So this is something that I think is really for us to know and for us to work with our students, is to always be emphasizing like those 2 buckets really need to go hand in hand in order to really understand what these tools can do and do well. So this question also came up or this was one of the questions asked, and it too is of course false. And it's false in part because while this was true when generative AI first came out, that it only worked up to a certain point, we have a lot more models now. We have a lot more, a lot of different tools out there, some of which actually search the web live. So one of the tools that I mentioned was Perplexity. And when I'm using generative AI, I'll use Perplexity for recency because it goes and it searches the web, because it's like it will go and it will find things that exist now using a method called RAG, which I won't go into right now, but to me, that is like that's something I value depending on what I'm working on. So this whole idea of like it only has knowledge up to a certain point, that's going to change from model to model. That's going to be different for Google's Gemini than it is for ChatGPT, than Claude, than Perplexity. And so we're back into the stage of like different tools represent different capabilities. Just like there's a difference in what you can do with, say, Google Docs versus what you can do with Microsoft Word versus what you can do with some of these other tools that are out there. And so this is one that, again, there was a mixed response on generative AI detectors can determine if something was created with generative AI. And lo and behold, this is false too. Remember that generative AI is about probability. Generative AI detectors are also only about probability. That is, they do not actually prove, they cannot actually determine anything. And this means that if you accuse a student of using generative AI based on a AI detector, you actually do not have a good means to prove it if that's your sole source of is that there's no proof there, right? It's different from when we're talking about, say, Turnitin before generative AI, where Turnitin would say like, oh, here's your writing. And oh, look, on this page, here's the same paragraph. Like, there's a stronger means to which you can make that argument of proof than with AI plagiarism detectors. They don't work that way. Additionally, they have a significant false positive rate. And within that false positive rate, right, that false positive meaning that inevitably the system is going to falsely accuse students of having used AI when they didn't. Within that, a higher proportion of students who English is their second language are the ones that are falsely accused of using generative AI. And that makes complete sense because what the AI detector is looking for is a pattern, is kind of this very often somewhat, some would argue, simplistic pattern of writing, or very formulaic pattern of writing. And of course, that's how we learn language. We learn language in formula. We learn language in a very kind of straight, like you learn this chunk, you learn this chunk. In fact, if you look at Duolingo, right? You literally just learn it in sentences that like often don't make any sense, but like you just learn it in these chunks. So the scenario that like I wouldn't say keeps me up at night, that's over dramatic, but the scenario I keep thinking about is the English language learner who gets accused of using AI. Like, how do you defend yourself against a machine that you have no clue about the back end that has said you've used this other set of tools in a language that is not your native language, right? Like that is a stacked deck. That is a thing I myself am not comfortable with. And I find just to be a challenge, a concern, because all of this is around probability. Like what the AI detector is doing is saying, oh, mathematically, these words align, these not even words, these chunks of words align in a way that AI does. But like there's no proof there. So students, in order to not be accused, they actually have to think like a criminal, an academic criminal, right? Students have to be like, oh, how do I write this in a way so that I don't get accused? And that feels so adversarial. That feels so wrong for how we teach or for how we think about learning. Is if you have to think about how not to be wrongly accused in your learning, you're not thinking about learning. You're not like those are so many extra steps to this. So I understand we have a concern around misuse, 1,000%. But AI plagiarism detectors are not going to be our solution. Like we can't mousetrap our way out of this. It is just going to create this kind of spinning up that's not going to help anybody. Within all of this, if you haven't heard me already saying, is basically, of abstinence has never been a great strategy. It didn't work for prohibition. It didn't work for the war on drugs. It's not going to work for generative AI. And this doesn't mean we have to just give up the guardrails and not care. But this does mean we have to learn about it, play with it, and think about it and use it in our classes with our students. Banning it or dismissing it is not actually going to do the thing that we think it's going to do. What it's going to do is delegitimize ourselves to our students. And that's something that higher ed is already reckoning with throughout, right? There was another piece because it's basically a piece that shows up weekly in Inside Higher Ed or Chronicle of Higher Ed or Times Education of like, people are really mad at higher ed or higher ed is irrelevant, right? If we don't think about these tools, if we don't engage with them, we are playing into that delegitimization. We are playing into that irrelevancy that is just part of the larger US cultural zeitgeist right now, and has been for, like, I don't want to pretend it's like all about right now. It has been going on for 30, 40, 50 years. So it does mean we have to lean into it, we have to think about it and start to play with it, even if we're uncomfortable. Like, one of the things I'm talking about it, I'm saying go and use it, but I also don't want folks to have any misunderstanding. Like, I have my feelings and thoughts about generative AI, like they run the gamut every hour on the hour. Like, I've had as much interest or excitement about generative AI today as I have had angst and concern and just exhaustion around it. So I don't say this as a, like, we've got to be cheery and chipper and just go at it and ignore all the things, but we just can't ignore it, and we have to think about how we're engaging with it. All right, so another category that we look at, we play around with, that we get intrigued with is data and info processing. So analyzing research, qualitative and quantitative data, reviewing documents, summarizing documents, comparing documents. It can be pretty good at abstracting information, right? That's part of what that large language model does, is it's an abstraction machine. So one of the ways that I love to use this in my current role is at our institution, we have 8-week courses and we have 16-week courses. And we have midterm evaluations and end of course evaluations. And that all calculates out to every 4 weeks, we have hundreds, if not, up to 2,000 or so, evaluations from students that are coming in, many of which are both qualitative and quantitative data. I want to use that data, like not just asking it just for the fun of it. I want to use that data to do something with, but that's a lot of data. And so one of the things that I've started to do is, once the data comes in, the first thing I do is a quick look through to make sure these surveys are completed by students anonymously. But what's in the data itself may not be anonymous, so I do a scan through to try to make sure there's no names mentioned. But then I'll take that document and I'll use that resource to find out something in particular. In this prompt, I'm saying, hey, take a look at this feedback. Give me an overview of students' experiences about faculty's usage of Moodle, which is our learning management system. Identify major themes, concerns, strong examples of positive use, and then for every detail, for each theme or concern or example, give me 2 to 3 exact quotes, 2 to 3 recommendations. Give me, a sense of what's going on there. So very quickly, I can get a fairly good sense of what's going on around this particular aspect that then becomes actionable, then becomes, okay, I've got the data now. I've got some really good quotes to understand how this shows up. I can always ask more questions or go back into the resource itself. But this I can use to take action of sending out some timely ideas or support or resources to make sure that faculty are doing the things that we want them to do, engaging in the ways we want them to engage. And so to me, like, there's the individual there's the individual ones that, like, you want to follow up on and you want to make sure if something has gone awry, you're addressing it. Holistically, if I want to be able to provide my faculty with, like, hey, here's some highlights, here's some things students are talking about across the board. Like, this is a really good, quick, and clear way to do that. Another tip within all of this that I think is important to consider, and it's around its usage, that both I think has been a game changer for myself, and I think is really helpful for us when we're using it with students, is that whenever it calculates an answer, to ask it what it's missing. So in that previous example where I showed that it does that survey, one of the first follow-up questions I always ask is, okay, but what did you miss? And this is where a question like this helps us start to understand or think about generative AI differently than how we think about ourselves, because it is hard for us to take ourselves out of our mind and to examine what we did. So when you do something, if right after somebody says, okay, but what did you miss? It might be really hard. I know it can be really hard. Like I do this regularly, and I'm like, it's hard to hold up that level of scrutiny, especially immediately after I do something. I'm usually just coming off the mixture of adrenaline or excitement or angst of whatever it was that I did. But with generative AI, it gets really interesting to ask it that because it will come back with newer answers. And those newer answers become just really helpful in understanding its use, seeing that it's going to miss stuff, and in your own mind, knowing its limitations, knowing where it's gonna fumble along. So I always like to have this out there as one of those like, oh yeah, you should like if you're not asking this, you're leaving things on the table that probably shouldn't be left. All right, final area of um, category to explore around generative AI is, of course, communication. And again, we shouldn't be surprised about this. This is probably one many people are familiar with, but also some different use cases that I've started to use that I think are really powerful. Obviously, the editing text, revising text, reviewing others' communication for tone, clarity. I know a couple people who when they're trying to really understand somebody and it's either they have trouble reading subtext or they're not quite sure what the other person is saying or the other person doesn't necessarily communicate well, we'll use AI as another means of interpreting, or to just improve your own communication for conciseness, for tone. This again is one of my favorites where the prompt is, telling AI it's an expert in communications and student success. Review the following email, analyze and provide 3 different interpretations grounded in research that could help me understand the student, their state of mind, and what might be an ideal approach to responding. And of course, the email that I have here is an email that I have no doubt everybody on this Zoom has probably had from at least one student this semester. And so the message is, hey, do the homework, don't have the textbook too much, also couldn't make it to class last week, LOL, what I miss. I'm sure we've received these kinds of communications before. And so I don't know about any of you, but I can get a message like that and have a very not ideal visceral reaction. And I can also have a reaction that is like, students today, and like I can go off on like the old man get off my lawn kind of like ego driven experience. Like we can all be there with that, absolutely. And I also know like I might need some time if I want to respond to this well, if I want to respond to this in a way that can be helpful, because I'm noticing in this outside of this, I know if a student is communicating with me, like they're communicating with me, they're reaching out, they're casting a lifeline, they're casting a line of some sort or another. So how can I best respond to this? So using a prompt like this to help me get outside of my own immediate like ego angsty driven mindset, it comes back with, okay, well, according to the American Health Association, College Health Association, students report record levels of stress, which can negatively impact academic performance and the like. The students' terse language and fragmented sentences suggest they are feeling overwhelmed and stressed. The lack of formality and detail might indicate a sense of urgency or frustration. Here's their approach, right? And the thing is I asked for 3 interpretations. I didn't include all 3, but by having 3 interpretations, I could have said 2, I could have said 4, but like having like 3 or 4 different ways to make sense of that can also help me figure out like what feels right in this moment, given the other context that I know about the student. Like I don't want to put a bunch of student information into the AI tool. I certainly don't want to put their names and stuff, but if I take just that message, and then what else do I know about the student? What can help me find or craft the most ideal response? So, oops, sorry about that. One of the things we're going to do after the break is we are going to jump into and start playing around with a prompt library. And that prompt library that's in that resource that I shared and am now sharing again, it has lots of different prompts around administrative and teaching and learning prompts that you can use with generative AI. Things to just note about that list, and as we start to play with it and think about it, is the categories are not perfect. They are there just as starters. That some of the prompts are, prompts could be for staff, for faculty, student workers, and students. So thinking about each of them, like what context makes sense to use them. Play and edit the prompts as needed. These are not, yes, you can potentially take them and move them over right into your, right into ChatGPT. But if they give you the start of an idea and you want to edit them, edit them. Personalized brackets. Anytime you see anything with brackets means you need to put in something relevant. So it's maybe asking about a course or an approach or an area, domain, topic, etc. And we know, as we've already talked about, the answers are going to be imperfect. They are going to be, they're going to be miscalculated. And so always retry or adjust it, or just hit the like, nope, try again. Like it's plenty of times I will tell it, nope, try again. Certainly use it as you're doing something that requires creating examples. You can tell it to just keep repeating. In other words, you don't have to put the prompt in each time. Always make sure you ask follow-up questions, as we talked about before. And don't be afraid to challenge those outputs. Don't be afraid to say no, or, where did you find that? Ask it to, show its work more or less. And then also, of course, as we mentioned, turn it, be sure to get to get some of the most out of it. Think about how you can turn it into an interviewer for yourself or students. And on that last part, I'll say that's a project we're working on at College Unbound, is using AI, and we'll play with this during the activity, is using AI as a tool for reflection. So using it to help students with their reflection process, with their reflection practice. So many of us know or have seen reflection is a huge part of learning. It's really powerful. It's really important. And it's a practice. And for some of us, we've been doing it for years. So like, yeah, you want me to reflect on something? I can sit there and like write about it for hours. But for others, they've not done it before. And one of the biggest challenges about reflection is, if we're doing it in a learning context, well, you're going to say, do this reflection and pass it in on Tuesday. And when you get the reflection on Tuesday, it might be pretty surface. It might be pretty weak in terms of how much the reflection is. And so what's interesting about generative AI is, if you do it right, if you have a good prompt, or you've created a custom GPT, the AI can serve that purpose to asking more questions before it's ever submitted, right? To interrupting and say, when the student says, oh, I didn't like it, to say, well, what didn't you like about it? Or can you say more? Like really helping the student draw out before they submit it, before it's time to give feedback. So it's a really interesting possibility that we've been exploring, and I think other places are starting to also look at, is just how might it be useful in that dialogic way. All right, so final tip for today is the prompt that I always use before I do anything else is, when I go to ChatGPT and I have the question in mind, I actually put this in, improve the following prompt to maximize the creativity and analytical abilities of a large language model, and then I put in the actual question that I'm asking. The reason for this, what I'm doing here, is saying, hey, you understand, and I put that in air quotes, you understand how you work. Here's the question I want to ask. Tell me how to ask you better questions. And typically it comes out with a better prompt. Often it will need some editing, but in doing this as a practice, I also better understand like how it operates, how it produces its outputs, how it makes connections. And so for all of us, in our use, in our students' use, this should be a thing we are continuing to do, because it helps us actually learn the tool that we're playing with. All right. So, what do we got for questions? solved it all. I know. We figured out AI, we can move on to the next. Oh, glad to hear, Ashley. Yeah, and I think this is for us and for our students. The more we can give concrete examples, the more we can give specific things that show them um, the ways that this can be used helpfully and not just like I think this is part of the challenge of if we're avoiding it, we're also missing the chance to show really cool use cases or to help them understand where it can be a bit of a game changer. One of the first things I did when generative AI showed up in December 2022, I convinced my provost to let me teach a course on generative AI in education, where like we played around with it, we learned about it, we thought about generative AI. So this is in January 2023. And our goal was to come up with usage policies for our students and faculty. And I'll never forget being in that class and having a student come in. And part of what was so great was the use cases they brought in. And a student came in and she was flustered. She was just like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm like, why? What's up? She's like, well, I don't know if I need to cite this or not. And what she explained was she took her notes, she put them into ChatGPT to organize. And she's like, now if I write a paper that's based on those notes, do I have to cite ChatGPT because it's my own notes? I just got it to analyze it. And like, so she had this she was interested in figuring it out. But more importantly, as we talked about it, she also shared that she got her paper in a week in advance. And our students, I should clarify, my students are adult learners. Our average age student is 37. This happened to be a 35-year-old woman. She knows herself. She knows who she is. She is not a person that organizes her notes and never has been. And organizing the notes was the barrier. What I mean by that is organizing the notes was the thing she kept putting off, and putting off until it was the night before the paper was due. And then she'd just do what we all have done at some point, the mad scramble to write the paper the night before. And that was just a regular cycle for her. But because she had this tool to organize her notes, that was the thing keeping her from actually writing the paper and actually getting the paper in advance or getting the paper done early enough that she could do drafts of it. And so I think that's a really important thing is we not only need examples for ourselves, we need to provide students with examples of really interesting, helpful use cases that they can benefit from.
Can I say something quickly, Lance? Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to add my background. I'm a former special education teacher, and we teach special teachers to teach special education. And it's always really amazing to think about the cognitive load that so many academic tasks carry, and that if we can teach all of our students to use these tools to lift some of that cognitive load for complex, higher level thinking tasks, that is particularly supportive of neurodiverse learners, where that might be at the center of their disability or their learning difference. But it's really powerful for all students, especially as we're thinking about universal design for learning.
Yeah, absolutely, Ashley. And that was, I think one of the things that I've been thinking about is that accessibility piece, the ways it changes. The example I carry with me as a learner is it took me I think 13 or 14 years to read Michel Foucault's History of Sexuality, Volume 1. I encountered it in grad school. I'm a first gen graduate student in my family. I didn't really have a lot of good guidance about what to expect. And we were just reading 20 pages of it. And I'm an avid reader. I love to read, and also philosophy is not a space that I read well. So when I say it took me 15 years or 13 to 15 years, what finally allowed me to actually read that book is I got the audiobook version finally came out, right? That is what worked for me. But can tell you, if this tool was around, I would have loved it because I could have taken it and been like, explain this to me like I'm a 5-year-old, right? Explain this to me in accessible language because I'm not going to get it. Allow me to test ideas out. So when I was in that class, instead of trying to hide, trying to avert eye contact, trying to like, don't call on me because I don't understand the conversation that's going on. Instead of doing any of that, I could have felt more confident in stepping into that conversation. I could have felt like, okay, I have those tools that have helped me make sense of this so that I can actually be present and maybe even dig in a little bit deeper to what's going on rather than just like, don't see me, please don't see me. So I think what you raised is a really important, valuable question or opportunity for us to be thinking about is that, yes, there are things that are just not going to work for lots of different reasons, and that these tools have some role in helping with that. I see from Roseanne, as scholars, what can we do about large learning models ingesting published or unpublished work for training purposes? Someone's ideas can turn up in someone else's work without any attribution and without either of them knowing what is happening. It could happen with fiction where creativity is more significant. Yeah, that is, there's different layers of challenges around that. I think, oh gosh, I can't remember who I was reading today. This is gonna bug me, but I was reading a piece, there's this interesting dynamic. Actually, I think it was Autumn Caines. Yeah, Autumn Caines just published a post of a talk that she gave, a keynote that she gave where she was drawing up this weird dichotomy of, with the Internet Archive losing its legal case, it's hard for actual humans to get access to actual knowledge in books. Meanwhile, it has been legally sanctioned for AI, for the time being, to ingest large amounts of books and knowledge. And I don't have a good answer for that. I will say, and I'll preface this with, I have very radical views about what copyright is and should be. I do have some hopes that somewhere within this, it helps us completely rethink copyright, crediting, and all of those things, because I think we're stuck in modes of copyright and crediting that privilege publishers over creators and limit what the actual knowledge creation mission is of higher education. And to go back to Caitlin's opening, like my background, my dissertation is on academic piracy and basically how we've created a system of knowledge creation that leaves lots of scholars feeling the need to break the law in order to access research literature, in order to be scholars. So it is a really funky challenge that we have that I don't have a great answer for. And yeah, the fair use question of what constitutes, who gets fair use and who doesn't, and under what circumstances, I think we're just going to continue to be grappling with.
Yeah, that's not going anywhere.
Oh,
Creative-
can't really.
No, you're fine.
No, I'm saying we couldn't really hear you, Heather.
I was just saying that the creative writing community in particular is a massive, massive mess, because pretty early in AI, generative AI's existence, it started to be used to create creative writing pieces, and to a lesser extent music, but mostly creative writing. And so like Amazon self-publishing and even reputable like literary magazines and stuff have been flooded with AI generated pieces, which is is slowing down their whole works and preventing them from being able to do their jobs. So yeah, there are lots of people that are like getting paid off of money because they can churn out thousands of AI generated books and stick them up on places where readers will unknowingly, pay for them. So yeah, the creative side's a massive mess. But
yeah,
that's like you said, like it's going to take everybody to figure that out, and it will involve changes on everybody's side to get through it.
yeah, it's very it's complicated. and it was complicated, and at loggerheads well before AI. I think AI has just made it like on steroids times infinity, right?
But the
Uh,
other thing, I wanted to say, kind of going back to talking about like your case with the student who
mm,
think about organizing their notes. One of the other things that I see really having to change in education is how we assess student skills.
mhm,
Because we would consider organizing information a writing skill that should come from you, that should, so you
mhm,
can easily see the case to say like, oh no, that's definitely plagiarism, organization,
mhm,
key skill set that we're assessing you for, and you
mm,
didn't do it.
yep.
So I think that's another thing that's going to be, I mean, higher education education in general will probably be very slow to make those transitions as a whole, but we're going to have to change how we assess students as well and what skills we actually are assessing them for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, uh, one thing that resonates, that it's interesting question of organizing. Where and when does organizing notes make sense? Like in which context, or is it as relevant, or where is it as relevant? Because like at one point, penmanship was really important, was part of the package. And so I grew up in the 90s. We got a computer, I think sometime in middle school. And when my teachers found out I had a computer, they encouraged me to actually type up my homework. And they encouraged me because my writing was atrocious. And like there is a marked difference from when I started typing things up versus when I was writing things that changed like my academic outcomes, right? Changed it from being like, so I think that, there's going to be a lot of these rich conversations about what do we change and why. And I think those are important to have, but they are important to have and not to just out and out decide we should still be, like A should still be happening. I think it is going to require a lot of deep digging, and I think the only way we can get into that is by actually playing with it and thinking about it. Um, I think Karen's comment of if you do teach students how to utilize generative AI effectively, remind them that they can put it on their resume and CV, right? So I think this is another point within this is starting to help them also see if they get comfortable with it, if they feel like they're able to talk about it in a clear sense, in a just like other skills that we encourage them to look at and think about. Yes, articulating that and bringing that up. All right, so I've got 128. Let's do a 10-minute break. Let people get up, be humans and bodies. And when we come back, we're gonna jump into an activity. Does that sound good for folks? All right. You're gonna